Welcome to our broadcast. Tonight, a look at the literature of sex. Also, legendary photographer and director and poet Gordon Parks and conductor Leon Botstein and pianist Marcus Roberts will talk about their new collaboration on Common Ground. We begin with sex in literature. Only two topics can be of the least interest to a serious and studious mood. Sex and the dead, said William Butler Yeats. Recently, there's been increased interest in the literature of sex, and we'll find out why. Joining me now to talk about it are some of the authors who created Robert Olen Butler, who won the 1993 Pulitzer Prize, and whose latest book, The Whisper, is the first of a trilogy on sex. Erica Jong, who wrote the best-selling novel of sexual liberation, Fear of Flying, and whose most recent book is The Devil at Large, Erica Jong on Henry Miller. And Nicholson Baker, author of the sensational bestseller Vox, which dealt with phone sex. His latest is The Fermata. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Here is the idea, and I just want to sort of give it to you, and then you run with it. The idea is, you know, what writers are writing about with respect to sex, and what they're having their characters do, and what they're having their characters say. What is it saying to us about sex? You know, what's the literature of sex communicating about sex, and how has it changed over the last few years since the so-called sexual revolution? And what new things can we say about sex and characters, because women working outside of the home bring new dimensions to the power relationship between men and women? So all of those things I want to have you talk about. Nick, I'll begin with Erica.
Well,
What's
first
changed?
of all,
Go ahead.
let's just say we live in a puritanical society, and we live in a society in which today the censorship problem is worse than it's been in ages. It's true that in 1962 we were allowed to read
Worse
Tropic
than it
of
was
Cancer.
for Henry Miller?
It's come back to kind of Anthony Comstock levels. The amount of censorship that's going on in libraries today, with Catcher in the Rye, with novels of Kurt Vonnegut, with novels of Judy Blume, with my books, is enormous. But because it's happening on a local and state level, it's not happening on a federal level. It's not being perpetrated by the federal government, but rather by individual library boards. People are not aware of the extent to which censorship has burgeoned in the last 10 years, thanks to people like the Reverend Donald Wildman, thanks to a new conservatism in the country, a fear that books create sexual misbehavior.
Yeah.
So we're in a period of extreme censorship, but happening on the local level. If you want to go back and look at this whole thing historically, you have to say that really we had a kind of 19th century pall over the literature of sexuality for many, many years, far into this century. In 1962, the Supreme Court liberated Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. And then by 68, you had John Updike's Couples. By 69, you had Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint. By 73, you had Fear of Flying, which I wrote. There was a brief moment, I would say 15 years or so, in which one could really write anything about sexuality. And then with the Reagan-Bush administrations, with the evangelical right becoming stronger and stronger on the local level, you began to have local censorship. And it is throughout our country. Ask somebody like Judy Blume, who writes children's books. I mean, writers are being censored in great, great numbers today. So there's a paradox.
All right, I'll
really
throw that open as our first subject and move on to the other things. You agree with that? I mean, you sense that? You see that? You think does it?
Well, in a theoretical way, I certainly can agree that there must be some censorship. My own writing hasn't been censored. I mean, my editor seems to read what I like and publish it, and I haven't been subject to that kind of thing. But writers now are writing under the influence of having come after the sexual revolution, and I mean, we're in a kind of post-pornographic society, and what we have to do now is make sense of some of the strange energies that pornography released, and find out, you know, the new vocabulary.
What's a post-pornographic era?
Well, I mean, if you grow up and you can see anything, which is the way my generation grew up, you still want to write literature, and so you can't get the same kind of mileage out of simply writing a literary book that has some dirty parts. You have to, you know, make it new somehow. You have to play with the ideas. There's literary sexual vocabulary, and then there's porn sexual vocabulary. And one of the things that I had fun doing in the Fermata was to kind of merge those two and invent some new words and have the hero actually become an amateur pornographer and see if he could run with the big boys. You know?
And it's really a dirty book.
It's
I
a
mean,
filthy book.
I was reading the Fermata on a cruise through the Caribbean with my friend Ken Follett and his wife and my husband, and we all passed around the Fermata. And Ken kept saying, "You've got to read this. This is a genuinely dirty book." But
now, are you pleased by that, or are you insulted by that, or are you offended by it?
Well, as long as the word dirty can
you can be pleased by the fact that 3 people read the book.
I'm delighted to hear that.
You can be insulted because she said it's dirty, or you could be
we also
pleased.
agreed that it was very courageous. But
What was courageous about it?
Because Nick is playing in the book on the whole idea of writing pornography.
Right.
He's not withdrawing and saying, this is high art, this is not pornography. He's actually playing with the notion that an intelligent protagonist is writing pornography to be pornography.
Yeah.
It's brave in that sense, I think.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's intentionally a dirty book, but because it has this weird science fiction premise of a guy who can stop time and can do anything he wants.
Including undressed women.
Right. And unfortunately, that's the use that he mainly puts it to. I hope it's got enough of a playful side or an exuberant side that it isn't just merely a dirty book.
But a woman would never have that fantasy, I fear.
Of
undressing
a man.
If I could stop time, I would not go around undressing women. It doesn't
Well, no, how about undressing men? If you
men or women.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to be polymorphous in my sexuality and say that I can imagine being in love with a woman as much as being in love with a man. After all, I'm a novelist. But I would say that wouldn't be my fantasy if I stopped time.
Yeah.
My erotic fantasy would be different.
What would it be then?
My erotic fantasies?
Yeah.
Well, you'll find a lot of them in the next book, Fear of 50. But
50 having to do with age?
Yeah. But my
just
erotic
give us a hint.
fantasy.
Come on.
Okay. Here's one of my erotic fantasies that I in fact write
Get
about
this show rolling.
in the next book, which is I've always imagined a brothel for women.
Yeah.
Why do women not have brothels?
I don't know. That's a good question. Why?
I mean, and I elaborate on this fantasy in the next book. Imagine a place where the busy career woman could go from 5 to 7. No snitching to husbands, no snitching to significant others. All the studs are AIDS tested. There are women for women who are bisexual or who enjoy women. It's beautiful. It's serene. The food is great. It's not like Plato's Retreat where they serve bologna.
Yeah.
They have
Scandal.
beluga caviar, and it's heaven.
What's the? I want to come to Robert here. What's the incentive and the inspiration and the drive to make sex a central part? Your character in They Whisper, it is partly about his own sexual liberation, his sense of sexual adventure, and his philosophy of sex, right?
That's right. They Whisper takes to dovetail back into your first question, too. I think the male impulse to love a lot of women and to love even more women than one at once has been universally castigated and dismissed as objectifying. And in many men it is true that impulse is to objectify women and to submit them to a sense of power and possession. But for Ira Holloway, and I think for many, many men, sex and that impulse to continue to love women is really driven by a much deeper impulse. For Ira Holloway, sex is a kind of secular sacrament. You know, the church has a notion of sacraments, which are physical somethings that resonate into the cosmic realm. Well, for Ira, a woman's body is exactly that. It is absolutely unique and individual to her. And it is a sacramentally charged metaphor for that deeper self, which is what he's interested in. And in fact, Ira lapses into women's voices in the book as a reflection of his intimacy with them. And I think that's what drove this book, to understand that impulse in men. And by the way, I keep saying in men...
And to differentiate it with the impulse in women?
No, but as I was about to say, as a matter of fact, now that They Whisper's been out there long enough to be read, I'm starting to get a number of letters from women saying that they love the book, they love Ira, but they identified with him. And I think I think that the society has been much more efficient at suppressing that impulse in women. And so they have been, too many women have been convinced that deeply serious connection to others, that search for intimacy, is a superficial and irrelevant, or at least a trivial thing. And it's not.
It seems to me that what you're saying in terms of what you're writing about fantasy have some sense of connection there, right?
Absolutely.
The poem that I had brought was one of Dorothy Parker's, which you probably all know. Woman wants monogamy, man delights in novelty. With this the gist and some of it, what earthly good can come of it? I don't agree with it. It's charming and it's funny. But women also are interested in polymorphous perversity. Women are also interested in many partners. But for most of history, they were stoned in the marketplace for saying this. They were not allowed to view the bodies of men sacramentally because they all died in childbirth.
But isn't that a change, though, then? I mean, isn't that in terms of a recognition of that, at least? And to be able to write about it, or not to be able to, but the fact that it's being written about and being talked about, it is a change in our understanding of woman's sexuality.
Absolutely. But if you are a woman who has written about this, and I am one, I mean, in 15 books, I have written about women's sexuality, and also in my poetry and other things, the kinds of abuse that have been directed at me for saying that women are sexual is truly unbelievable. I mean, everything from being called a mammoth pudenda in the New Statesman, when Fear of Flying came out 20 years ago, to being accused of being a whore and a prostitute, and not being taken seriously as a writer, because I dared to say what we all know is true, that women are lusty, and that women can regard sex as entertainment, or women can regard sex as a sacrament, or women can find their spirituality.
That's the way he regarded sex, as a sacrament.
As part of the spirituality and sexuality are one and the same, that one can lead to the other, that one can become the other. For saying these things, I have often been treated as if I'm absolutely a witch.
All right, let me come to Nick. Tell me why sex is so important in your writing, why it reverberates in the two books we're under discussion. And the Vermont.
I gave a thorough treatment to the escalator and the shoelace and some earlier books and to fatherhood, and I felt that I'd kind of, covered some of that
you
ground.
deserved an opportunity to free and liberate yourself.
Well, yeah, mid-30s is kind of the time to start ramping up the
go
sex
ahead.
writing.
Tell me why. I mean, just help me understand writing sexual literature that is sexual.
Well, it's, for one thing, I mean, I really recommend it. It's fun. It's a lot of fun to write about sex because especially when you can enter this kind of confused state where you're not sure whether you're entertaining yourself comically or you're, sexually aroused. There's kind of a shuttling back and forth.
And you get turned on while writing it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, why write hundreds of pages about sex unless there was some, personal erotic aspect to it? But also there's this curiosity.
There's a kind of masturbation about all this?
Ask any writer who writes about sex and see if they'll ever deny that they get so turned on that they jerk off while writing it. I won't ask these two gentlemen to validate it.
Never.
Nor will I.
But there's also the element of curiosity because you put out the little things that are in your head, and you want to find out if other people think that you're a fringe character or whether they go, oh yeah, I've always wanted to. When I was in 4th grade, I wanted to stop time, and certainly I wanted to take off my teacher's clothes. That was the first thing. And actually, the surprising number of women have said that they did have this fantasy, or that this is not, although it does tend to split along gender lines. That when I did research for the book, I said, to people, well, what would you do if you had a garage door opener, and you could just stop the universe? And men just instantly kind of, well, the locker room of the women's basketball team, that sort of thing. And women generally, that wasn't at the top of their list, but there was kind of a feel, occasionally.
Are there themes that are being explored now? Let me just take an example of who's not here. Michael Crichton, in Disclosure, is writing about harassment, woman harassing man because she is a power figure. Has the change in the power relationship affected what has been written and said about sexuality?
Well, to speak of Michael Crichton, I think that's an immensely entertaining book, Disclosure.
Right.
But I think it's based on a premise that very rarely happens,
which is all about power,
that women molest men. I don't think that happens nearly as much as men molest women.
I don't want to get into that debate. I realize that's been raised, but the point he was making is that when there are that at least the change in power, women's
the possibility
acclamation
now
of
exists.
power
that women can
Right.
demand that men make love to them in exchange for certain things. But imagine this happened in the time of Catherine the Great.
Okay, Catherine the
Right.
Great demanded that men...
Cleopatra.
Right. And so what does that say? That says that,
there have
with
always
power...
been exceptional women who did that. There have always been exceptional women...
That the use of power and dominion over people has no gender.
That fantasy has no gender, but there's a problem, Charlie.
Okay.
And the problem is this, that if a woman demands power over men in her life, they have the ultimate veto because they can always wilt.
Yes.
If a man doesn't like that power, he can say, I don't feel like it.
Yeah. Or
and
I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to, or I have a headache.
Right.
And this happens, whereas a woman, whether she's aroused or not, can be raped. A man can't be raped. So when women have power, we encounter... The other thing that happens, and it happens a lot nowadays, is I don't like how much power you're having, and therefore I won't have an erection.
Right.
We have the erection strike.
Yes. Let me come back over here. That's right. I'm not going to work today.
Right.
Or at this moment, because I'm tired, because I've had too much, whatever. Talk about themes and what you want to say about sexuality beyond the notion about the number of partners, that monogamy is unnatural, I think is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not sure I'm saying that.
I'm not either. I'm
because
badly,
the book is not it's not an attempt at finding the unified field theory of sexuality.
Right.
Ira comes to a place in his life where he recognizes that he's not whole.
Right.
In spite of his best intentions, in spite of his sincere and deep and sacramental appreciation of women's bodies and his resistance to objectifying them, in spite of the fact that he... You see, men in this, with the seriousness of that impulse to love many women, and even in small ways, there's a kind of holy grail for Ira in the book, a girl named Karen Granger, who at age 10, he convinces to go, and this is the mid-50s, into a shoe store where they have, remember the old x-ray machines that they had there to check the fit. And there are two viewports, and he's stricken with love at the sight of the bones in her feet.
Yeah.
And this is a girl that ultimately comes back to him at the end of the book, too, in his mind. A girl he put his arm around once in the summer of 1955, and he has never lost the impact of that combination of innocence and intimacy. Mm-hmm. And that, so that the deep seriousness of that impulse does not just attend to the ultimate sexual act. It's a matter of intimacy in our lives and the encounter even in smaller frames of time or levels of connection.
But Robert, you have another scene in the book which absolutely struck me. When your hero is in a Vietnam brothel, and he understands Vietnamese, and he hears this sort of huffing and puffing person say, my little darling, and the prostitute is saying, you pig, you monkey's ass. Yes. And the man and the woman don't understand each other at all. The man is seeing it as an ecstatic act, and the woman is doing it to make money.
Exactly.
And
there's
a
very
moment
words
there that's very extraordinary.
Yes, yes. That ultimately the connections don't fit. Although the impulse on both sides, now in that circumstance where the woman has become a prostitute and is on that side of the power equation, that the impulse still, as it's not really granted to men, is that the man desires the joining with the other, and it can happen in small ways, and it can even happen with a prostitute in the man's fantasy or whatever. That it's the relinquishing of self. It's the becoming a woman, and that's.
But women
you see,
also find relinquishing of self in sexuality.
Absolutely,
at its best.
And it's the mutual relinquishment that makes that work.
Let me come to two things as writers. Is writing in the voice of the opposite gender difficult at all?
It's fun. It's complicated. I like doing it because well, I wrote in this guy's voice. He's kind of a nerdy person. He's a flawed character. He's, you know, furtive and everything. And then what he wants to do is write these pieces of amateur pornography and then hide them or bury them in the sand, say, so that a woman sunbathing could, you know, while she's idly digging, could find it and read it. And then because he has the power to stop time, he can watch her read it. Well, it's a very writerly fantasy. We all would like to be able to see someone reading our work and kind of see, you know, I like to listen when my wife reads. I like to listen when she laughs.
Yes.
You know, and so it's that's that voyeuristic thing is kind of a combination of what writers want and what, you know.
And
men
writing
want.
in the margin is always fun too.
Let me just interject before we leave here. The other writing in the margin.
Yeah, saying yes, I agree with that. Or wow.
Is that what you take a pen when you read?
Always.
I do
My
too.
books
I
are
cannot
just
read
filled
without
with
a pen.
stuff like that.
Tell me about all of you about love and sex, and what are we saying about love and sex?
Well, I tried to write about love in one earlier book about parenthood and family, and this one is really much too playful and strange a book
to get into love.
I can't. It's too big a subject to. Well, of course, it would be nice if the two overlap. Let's just say that.
Are you saying anything about love here? I mean,
About
in
my
the body of your work.
I would say that in all my books, my heroines reach out for wholeness. They want love and sex to be together.
Yeah.
They want spirituality and sensuality to be one thing. And what they discover generally is that they can't always be. Sometimes one has just pure pan sex. That is, you have the most wonderful sex with somebody that you really should not spend your life with, or even a month with, or even live with for 2 days.
But should you spend your life with, I mean, we're now talking like psychologists here, and I want to move into it, but should you spend your life with anybody you don't have great sex with? No, you shouldn't.
I think you can. There are all different kinds of love. You can have cuddling love. You can have pan love. You can have cooking love.
That's when stuff you spray in the pan.
No, that's when you find somebody who is like a mythical satyr.
Yeah.
And all you want to do is have sex. But do you marry that demon lover? Most women don't, because for the most part, he's that way with everybody.
Oh.
And he has about 700 other women, generally. I mean, this is a long subject.
Are you saying when you find a great lover that probably whether it's male or female...
He's probably good with everybody.
Oh, but if it's a woman, if it's a great lover who's a woman, probably good with everybody?
No, I will say that there are some times when you know that you and that other person have a particular connection that you share with no one else. And of course that's the best. And if love goes with it, bless it. That's very rare.
Very rare.
Very rare.
Last word here, Robert. You know, why do you think women are responding to? You said your letters in which they're saying. I mean, you told one of my producers, Maya, that the notion of what the women are saying that to demanding their men read this book.
Yes.
Now, why are they demanding that they read the book?
It's become a litmus test for women. I'm meeting them in all
why
the
would
readings.
a woman want a man to be identified and to read and understand Ira?
Because Ira takes a woman as an absolute, unique, and beautiful individual. He finds almost any woman beautiful in her own unique way. He sees...
So in order to appreciate women for their beauty, you have to want all of them?
You have to recognize the inner beauty that resonates into that sacramental object of the body.
If you want to read more, They Whisper. It's by Robert Olen Butler. They're from Mounted by Nicholson Baker. And Erica Jong has a new book on Henry Miller, and her Fantasy at 50 will be at your bookstores whenever her publisher gets the manuscript. Right?
They have
they have the manuscript. All right. We thank you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Gordon Parks is here, and we'll also hear from the great Marcus Roberts. Back in a moment. Stay with us.